interest. I appreciate that probably everybody has had emails from the people involved with Ingles Court. I have not replied to any of them or expressed any opinion. I would think that if anybody else is in the same boat, they have no declaration to make. But if anyone has responded to these emails with anything, then they had better declare an interest. So are there any declarations of interest in that or in any other things? Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Declarations of interest on items 6, 8 and 10. Council appointed Director of Angus Alert, papers 251, 253 and 255. I believe 21 in each case. I think a special dispensation there, so I'll stay in the meeting and vote if necessary.
Okay, Councillor Bell.
Thanks, Convener. Declaration of interest for item 10. I'm a board member of Voluntary Action Angus, appointed by the council, and a general one as a member of the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership for a variety of papers. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Devine.
Thanks, Convener. I'm the same as Councillor Duff, items 6, 8 and 10, and a specific exclusion for these. And then 17, I did reply, but it was in very general terms and didn't express any views on it.
Thank you. Councillor Miles.
Yes, declaration on item 12 and others with the Health and Social Care Partnership as a board member and vice chair of that, but especially item 12, just for noting anyway, so no problem there. I was approached in item 17 to sign the petition, but for obvious reasons I declined and pointed out it would be inappropriate to do so. I probably haven't seen the signatures on the petition, but it's very likely I know many of the signatories on that, but I will still feel I can take part, as I've made no comment publicly.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Braze.
Yes, similar to Councillor Miles, I've had a lot of correspondence surrounding item number 17, and I have responded to that correspondence. And I do know some of the people who have signed the petition, but I will be remaining in the meeting and I'll take part in any voting if required.
Thank you. Don't see any other hands up. Councillor Braze, Councillor Miles, you'd like to drop your hands at the moment? Fine. Right. I now propose to take item 17. This is very much a procedural situation, and at this point I'm going to intimate that I intend to recommend that the matter be referred to Angus because its significance requires a debate. I have the terms of Mrs. Turner's request for a deputation and I will read it out. I respectfully request that Angus Council reopen Ingles Court to offer a caring, safe and happy place for the elderly population of Edzell and the surrounding area to live. To me, that deputation and the subject of that deputation does not apply to what we are about to deal with in terms of the petition. And I'm going to propose that we do not hear the deputation. Do you have a seconder for that? If there are no seconders, do we propose to hear the deputation?
Agreed.
Okay. In that case, can we invite Mrs. Turner to speak to the committee? But I will warn Mrs. Turner that if she stays off the subject of submitting this to Angus Council, or to undertake a detailed scrutiny review, or to request a fuller report, or to determine that appropriate action has already been taken, or just to note the receipt of the petition, the recommendations 1.1 to 1.5 on the report, I will pull her up. I don't want to hear anything about keeping Edzell open. I merely want to hear whether or not this should be referred to Angus Council or not. Mrs. Turner?
Hello, I don't know.
Hello, yes.
Sorry, you can hear me. I'm not used to these systems, so forgive me if I don't come across as very lucid. You can all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I start off by saying, having listened to you, it's slightly scary because I'm not particularly politically astute. So if I do stray and say something that's inappropriate or whatever, obviously you'll just have to correct me.
I'll brief you again, Mrs. Turner, before you start. The terms of your submission for a deputation was in terms of keeping Ingalls Court open.
Yes.
If we refer this to full council, that will be a matter that you can take up with full council.
Okay.
The only thing you can speak to is where this petition should go in the meantime. And I would suggest to you that my suggestion and what I intend to move later to send it to full council is the best you can expect out of this committee.
Right. Okay. Well, I just, I didn't want to talk about policies, politics, finances, carbon emissions and everything else that's been spoken about. I just really wanted to have a quick talk about the human side of this.
I'm sorry, the human side of it does not come into this particular motion.
Okay. Well, it's just very frustrating because it seems that nobody is at all interested in that. And as somebody who probably received most of the signatures for that petition, I don't know where we take this now, because everybody without fail was more than happy to sign that petition. And not only were they happy to sign the petition, but as they were signing it, everyone was so angry, so upset, and very, very cross, I have to say, with Angus Council about how this whole procedure has happened regarding Ingalls Court. And I just wish that somebody, would actually listen to the truth about it, rather than drowning us all in policies, politics, etc., etc. So I don't know where we take this to now, but it is very frustrating.
I think we'll find, Mrs. Turner, at the end of your submission, when I put this to the vote, that people are listening.
Okay,
because
thank you.
If you bear in mind that at the last full council, the provost refused to allow discussion on Angus Edsel Court. If we send this to full council from this committee, he cannot refuse to hear it.
Thank you.
So what we're trying to do is in the best interests of the people of Edsel.
Absolutely, yes, and that's what the people of Edsel and the surrounding area want. But it would be really lovely to to be able to speak to somebody who will actually listen to the
You will have that opportunity when this comes up at full council.
Okay, all right, thank you very much.
We are very limited in what we can do here. Okay. We can only refer it for various reasons. Councillor Whiteside.
Thanks, Ms Turner, for coming along today. I think maybe Councillor King's now explained things. I think there's a little bit of confusion there, and I think the fact that it's been referred to full council will give you a full opportunity to speak about your petition. So that was all I wanted to say. Thanks for coming along.
I appreciate that, and thank you very much for listening. As I say, I'm sorry if it's not particularly relevant today.
Okay, Councillor Miles.
Yes, in some ways, Mrs. Turner, if she wishes to put a deputation to full council, we have far more appropriate to say what she'd like to say, and she'll get a hearing at that point.
All right, brilliant. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, convener. Yes, I too would welcome Ms Turner's deputation to a full council meeting where this is debated. Could I also just point out to the very top of this paper, the petition Ingalls Court Brecon might have read better if it said petition Ingalls Court Edsel.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Just thought I better point that out for clarity.
I think that's very appropriate, convener, Councillor Bayes. Right. Is there anyone else wants to come in on this one? Okay, in that case, I will move that we take recommendation 5 to refer the matter to Angus Council, where in the view of the committee, its significance requires a debate. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, convener.
Councillor Miles.
No, I would have seconded as well, so you've got a seconder now. Thanks.
That's great, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Brays?
Yes, I fully welcome this going to a full meeting of Angus Council where it can be properly debated. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, that is agreed. We will refer this matter to Angus Council. I would ask the Chief Executive and the officers to ensure that this matter is heard before any other matters on Ingles Court that may be coming up at full council, and also that any Angus Court which may be on the agenda for any other meeting before full council are taken off those committees and put on full council. That will remove any confusion or any possibility of decisions being taken before this matter has been fully discussed. Is that possible, can I ask?
Noted, convener.
Thank you. Right, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, Mrs. Turner. You're welcome to stay as a guest for the rest of the very long meeting that we have. But now I'm going to ask Stephen Wood of the Fire and Rescue Service to give the Scottish Fire and Rescue report.
Thank you very
Convener,
much, everyone.
thank you, Mr. Turner. Convener, sorry to interrupt. Can we go back to item 3, the minute of previous
Sorry,
meeting?
I beg your pardon. I skipped that one, didn't I? Item 3, the minute of the previous meeting. Is that the correct minute?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
good. Any questions or comments? No. Right, now let's go to item 4. Stephen.
Good afternoon, committee members, and thank you very much, convener. Before I move to the Q1 report, I would like to provide a short update on the unwanted fire alarm signal consultation, which I signposted at June's meeting. The consultation is now live, went live on the 19th of July, and it will run until the 11th of October. The proposal is to significantly change the way in which we respond to automatic fire alarms in non-domestic premises. And the purpose behind it is to make us more efficient in the use of our resources, particularly around operational training and our community safety work. The service is consulting on 3 options for our future response, but I can assure members that our response to any report of a fire will be immediate and appropriate. Whilst the consultation documents provide comprehensive information on the background, the process and the proposal, as well as the safeguards included, I do anticipate significant interest in this consultation, so it's my intent to contact members in the near future and arrange an information session where we can give this due time to consider the proposals that are being asked for consideration within the consultation. I would now like to move to page 15 of your pack and invite members to scrutinise, question and note the quarterly monitoring report for Q1. If you can look at this summary on page 20, we can see that there has been an increase in accidental dwelling fires, but we can also see that there's been a decrease in the accidental dwelling fire casualty numbers, the non-fatal casualty numbers. It gives me an indication that we are getting early warning of these fires. The fires have been low severity, but in no way can we be complacent about the number of accidental dwelling fires there. And we will continue to increase and focus on our home fire safety visit and information provided to householders. We've also seen an increase in non-fatal road traffic collision casualties and in deliberate fires, and both primary and secondary. And I'll ask Group Commander Gibson to provide some context around these in a moment. Finally, we have seen a decrease in the number of incidents within our non-domestic buildings, the number of road traffic collisions, and in the number of unwanted fire alarm systems. So before we take questions on the report today, I'll ask Group Commander Gibson if he could provide some additional information and context to the report. Scott.
Thanks, Stephen. Good afternoon again, everyone. Turn to the performance highlights page on page 21 of your report pack. It sets out the key successes and challenges that we've had during Q1 that we're asking the committee to note. As Stephen pointed out, there has been a slight increase in the number of fires in Q1. We set a target for year 21-22 of 76, so we are higher than where we would like to be. They are mostly involving cooking, and some were smoking related. However, the number in general has been dropping, which is having a positive impact on keeping the number of related casualties low, which is highlighted. We have still got good referral pathways in, and that referral pathway is increasing all the time with the work we're doing, more so now that we're getting back out into and engaging with communities as well. Moving on to bullet point 3, we've only experienced one non-domestic building fire during Q1, which is below average. These types of fires continue to be very low within Angus because of the fire safety management arrangements within non-domestic buildings we have in place. They're generally of a good standard. Our enforcement teams are now increasing their face-to-face audits and work with building owners, and we've done some additional work in preparation for the Women's Open, which we've just had around the hotels and that were in use over the period of the weekend just past. Moving on to bullet point 4, we've highlighted the decrease in the numbers of road traffic collisions, which were mainly around the Arbroath area. There were no fatal casualties and 11 casualties during that period, which is slightly above. However, 8 of these were from 3 incidents. I would also like to provide a little bit more context around the other special services that we're increasingly involved in. Surrounding priority RTCs, there were 57 further special services in Q1, and over half were effective entry and assisting other agencies, predominantly where there was concern for the occupier. The remainder were made up of acting as a first responder and other rescues from such as lifts and other animal rescues. Moving on to bullet point 5, I've highlighted the unwanted fire alarm signal incidents were below average during Q1, which is great to see, again with a slight hint of caution as we were still in lockdown for a large part of that period, and COVID may have had the impact on that. Stephen's already mentioned the consultation on the unwanted fire alarm signals and the time for change, and I would encourage members to take up the offer of receiving some further information and consultation on that. Referring to bullet point 6, I've highlighted the increase in deliberate primary fires over Q1 of this year, along with a large increase in our deliberate secondary fire numbers. Again, almost half of these Angus Dundee boundary around the Monifeet and Sidlow area, and we are continuing to work in this area with our partners to try to drive these down. We're continuing with our youth engagement work around Forfar and Arbroath, where there are the other areas of high instance of these types of incident. And we've also managed to now get the education packages onto the school's education online services to assist with this. Whilst the numbers in Angus are relatively low in comparison to other local authority areas, it's one area to see us reduce further, as we have not managed to achieve the ambitious targets from previous years. As we all know, COVID's proved very restrictive with our face-to-face interactions, but we're now starting to get out into communities and engage with these youth groups again, which I believe will assist us in a reduction of this type of incident. And then finally, referring to bullet points 7 and 8, if the committee can note that although during Q1 we have seen an increase in staff absence due to isolation, we're managing our way through this to maintain our operational capability and provide a full service to communities. We've continued to risk assess premises that are high risk remotely and continue to adapt our ways of working in line with the government guidelines. We've also supported the local resilience partnership throughout the pandemic, offering up our services as required and trying to support the community where we can through the recovery and beyond. And I would draw your attention to Appendixes 1 and 2, which provides some detail on the work that we are carrying out with the most vulnerable within the area and some of the good initiatives that has happened during the first quarter of this year. That concludes. Thanks very much for listening, everyone, and now happy to accept any questions.
Okay, bids for questions. Councillor Miles.
Page 20.
Okay, Councillor Devine.
Just 33.
Okay, Councillor Braze.
It's more of a general question, convener.
Okay, anyone else? Right, Councillor Miles, page 20, please.
Yes, I can't get the point, but it's on unwanted fire alarm signals. If we could maybe change the terminology here, all farm signals are unwanted, but it's either inappropriate or false or whatever. It might be a better terminology to use there, just to clarify what we're actually doing. And finally, I'd like to congratulate on the work done for the open list just passed. As a Canusi committee member, it's gone very smoothly, and obviously the work done behind the scenes with the fire department was very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whiteside, you've just suddenly appeared. Do you have a page number?
27, please.
Thank you. In that case, you're next.
Thanks, convener, and thanks to Stephen and Scott for all the information. I was quite particularly like the information in the appendices. But my question's on page 27 around the new initiative that's replacing Safe Drive Stay Alive at the moment. Well, obviously, we're really impressed by the Safe Drive Stay Alive. So I just thought you could maybe give us a little bit more information about the new.
Thank you very much, Councillor Whiteside. Yes, we're at the very early stages of this. I was involved a number of years ago in Safe Drive, and whilst it's hugely inspiring, extremely worthwhile, there's possibly been a national move away from these high impact, and the concern really is around how long the impact lasts within our young people. At the moment, we're at the stage when we're going around the country, we're having a look at other initiatives that there's some less resource intensive and longer lasting. So it's certainly, we're well aware of the benefits of Safe Drive, and we're looking to replace that with something is equally or better in terms of the impact it has on young people. But it's really around how we resource this. The buses bringing people together in large venues. There's a lot behind that, and I think there's probably now tried and tested improved ways to do it, and we're at the sort of evaluation stage. So we will keep you informed as we move towards any new initiative around that, but we are keen to get that back onto the young people in the area. So I'll keep you posted on that.
Thanks, Stephen.
Okay, Councillor Devine, page 33.
Yes, just a couple of points on page 33. I'm really pleased to see that you're attending the Angus groups. Presumably this is because of the involvement in some of the antisocial behaviour, but there certainly has been an increase over the past few months there. I wanted to ask you about persons at risk number 4. You have fire alarms and smoke detectors. Were these free to the people you put them in for? Can you identify criteria for this? Because this is going to be quite an expensive thing for many people. Well, for all of us actually, but you know, for some people it's just going to be so difficult to afford. And also, are there any capacity issues there as well? And just one thing that's been pointed out to me on the next page under referrals, and number 2, Angus Care and Repair doesn't exist anymore. So I think that just is a thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Devine, and I'll note that with regard to the terminology on point 2, you've hit on a very pressing issue around the fitting of the new detection systems. I think we'll now start to see increased publicity coming out from Scottish Government. It is a house the requirement for link detectors. We are supporting that through fitting of the detection systems as part of our home fire safety visits. We have been provided with funding from the Scottish Government in the region of £900,000 over for 2 years. We've done all the training of our employees. right across the country, so that they're in a position to fit it. And from the numbers there, we're now able to fit it. There is a limited amount of it that so it's part of our ongoing drive to make sure that we're giving the best possible service to those that need it most. And it goes back to the referral pathways. We need to identify those that really do need the systems. We have got, as part of our scoring methodology in our home, to rank these, and as will become apparent as the government rolls out its information, we are only able to fit these to owner-occupied who are considered high risk under our score. But landlords, social housing, they all have an obligation to fit these. We're cautioning against, if we go out and fit them all, we will run out of detectors very quick to those that need them most. So we have to be strict with our scoring protocol. Having said that, if we visit any homes that don't have detection and they're perhaps rented and there's a landlord responsibility to do it, we won't leave. Always fit some our single point detectors as a means of raising alarm, and there will be advice available for how you push to get the appropriate responsible person to fit the detection. Anyone without detection, as we do now, will always fit some form of detection, and hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Devine.
Yes, thank you. I think we'll have to look into other criteria, which is not there. Hopefully there is some help available for other people.
I was just going to ask questions on that, Councillor Devine. There is a very large body of people who live in older housing, like myself, who will have to get this done commercially, and I don't seem to be able to find anyone at the moment who's offering this service. It would be useful if we could get an approved list of contractors in the Angus Dundee area, where people could be getting a professional and I won't say cheap service, but certainly something which is not being charged over the odds.
Yes, thank you, and I think that is something that has exercised the minds of the Scottish Government, that there is a risk of those rogue traders taking advantage of such a sweeping change.
Yes.
There is certainly on our website, there's a link through on the Scottish Government website, and this is the sort of thing I think ahead of the go live date, I think early next year, that we need to feed back into them. I'm fairly sure, following the attempted launch last year, that this will be part of that FAQs. What position they are in order to do an approved content. I suppose there are already trade associations that would cover that sort of security of quality of work. But I think referring to the Scottish Government website is probably the first port of call in terms of this, and we will be feeding it back in as we are in dialogue with Scottish Housing, with the Housing Department all the time, just around the publicity and making sure that people aren't overly alarmed by it and are able to fit to the standard appropriately.
I'm looking particularly in terms of people getting in touch, possibly with the fire service locally, and being able to get from them a list of contractors who are approved by the fire service as, you know, being the sort of contractor they would expect to be doing the sort of work, so that people have the option to go in and say, well, there's half a dozen people here that I recognise as firms, some that I don't, but they're all recommended by the fire service, so they are able to do this. You could look at that, please, Stephen.
Yeah, it's a similar question to the one around fire risk assessors, and very often the duty holder will look to us to recommend, but because it's a commercial enterprise, we can't, as a public body, suggest that certain people are on it, or else we fall foul of competition practices. So I think it has to go down to the trade association bodies. We wouldn't have time to accredit any work, so I think we'll have to rely on the electrical. I think it's nice that accredit electricians.
Okay, Stephen. Councillor Whiteside, your hand's still up. Is that an old hand? Councillor Brays, you had a general question.
Yes, thanks, convener, and thanks, Stephen and Scott. Yes, there have been many water-related incidents this summer, some with tragic consequences. But there was an incident in my Brecon and Edsel ward near Ganachie Bridge, and I wondered perhaps if you could give us a brief synopsis of how that rescue was conducted and how services worked together. I don't need you to go into great detail, but it would be good just to have a wee insight into the operational there. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Brace. Just to reassure you from a national perspective, I think maybe 3 weekends ago there really was a horrendous weekend. Multiple incidents, multiple deaths, really concerning. I think there is an impact of COVID here. We even going to local authority pools and learn to swim, that there is going to be a lingering impact for this sort of thing. We are already in the planning stages through our school engagement to make sure that the survival techniques that you've probably seen publicised, that it's to the forefront. I think we've probably missed the real critical point this year, but it's certainly in the planning both locally and nationally. So it really it wasn't a weekend we want to see repeated, and I think with all our partners we're working very, very hard on this for the future. With regard to the specific incident, if I could pass you to Scott, who will be able to give you some information on that.
Yep, thanks, Councillor Brace. Yes, so the incident in question at Ganachie Bridge, it was 2 young girls, 14 years old, who had entered the water for a bit of leisure, and one got into a bit of trouble, was helped out by a friend, and ended up being stuck area of the water. So our crews managed to obviously remove them from the water with the police partners there, and ambulance attended as well. And off of the back of that, our local liaison officers are now working with the local council to start to look at putting out some signage and perhaps some throw lines in that area, and seeing if we can just get a bit of a message out there and a bit of assistance, because it's quite a regular, not a regular occurrence, but a regular area used by individuals to go out and do a bit of open water swimming, if you like, or playtime. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Okay. Is there anything else on item 4? Let's go back to the top of it. The recommendations that we note and comment on this. Do we agree to note? Agreed. Thank you. Members will note there's nothing from the police this time. The new commander and the new local commander both requested that the police report be deferred until the next meeting because they had both just newly been appointed, and I agreed to that. So let's move on to item 5, the internal audit activity, page 38. Cathy Wiley, please.
Thank you. The update report on the activity with the plan for 2021 and the implementation of recommendations. You'll see there on page 38, we've got a few other things I'm asking you to look at this time. One is to approve the removal of participatory budgeting from the plan for this year. We're also bringing one of the audit reports that was taken to the Igb Audit Committee because it was so heavily involved with some of the council systems that I felt that it was important that you see it too. And I've got a couple here that I'm going to look at just now. On page 39 at section 4, I've put in this additional bit into the executive summary, just on the back of the discussions that we had back in April for the Scrutiny and Audit Committee. And I just wanted to get your feedback if you think that's helpful and useful, just to see what's new this time round, and I'll put that into future reports if you want me to.
Right, can I just interrupt you there, Cathy?
Yeah.
What is members' opinion of that new table? Are you happy with it?
Yes, I think that's very helpful at the beginning, but I would still quite it after each of the audits, going back to that to see what the recommendations were, which priority areas. I think that just, sorry. Okay.
Anyone else? Right, Kathy.
Okay. Page 40, just at the top there, number 5, it's just to let you know that I've extended the IT support contract with Assets just to give us the final year of support from them, and I'm currently just reviewing what we need in future before we decide what the next stage is for the contract in future. And then if we move into the actual progress report, page 43, participatory budgeting was included in the plan this year. It's been carried forward, I think maybe for 2 years now, and the set of circumstances that put it in there in the first place have already passed now. And I think given the report that came up to the council recently and the fact that more reporting on this is due to the council very shortly, I think that there's not a lot that audit can add to this at this time, and that we should consider it for next year's plan when we come to do that planning early in 2022. So it's just to get your approval to take that out of the plan at the moment. The other items we've got being reported this month, sorry. We've got a piece of work around the iPay system, a review of council tax, the usual continuous auditing around payroll and creditors, and then the information from the Igb audit. So if I start on the iPay background, we did a piece of 1819 on iPay because there were some issues with the new system when it went in, and it was always the intention that we would come back and look at the post-implementation review of this, but for one reason or another that was never actually undertaken. We're now at the point where the council is at the end of the contract with the current provider of that system and are looking to go out and re-tender this. So what we did was a piece of consultation work that would help with that preparation for the new tendering process, and we looked at what had happened before. We looked at some of the previous issues that were identified, and whether we also looked at the preparation that had been undertaken to date for the tendering of the new system. And there was a report that produced, I think there were 11 recommendations around things that can be used to make sure that the project management going forward for this is as robust as it possibly can be. I think at the bottom of page 49, there is one wider learning point that we identified from this, and some of the issues that were identified originally with the way the system operated have been quite challenging to deal with, just because there's been changes in personnel, and it's really just a plea in future to make sure that there's full handover of areas that are requiring attention when people are leaving the council or moving on to another area to work. The next piece of work that we're reporting is the council tax. This was a cyclical piece of work because it's a while since we've looked at council tax, and it is one of the council's key systems. And so the scope here was to provide assurance that there's an adequate control framework in place governing the billing and collection of council tax in Angus, with quite a few objectives here. So we split it down into some general ones, reliability and billing, and the collection and monitoring. And on page 52, you'll see that the overall assurance level for this is comprehensive assurance. In terms of general, both of those objectives were green. In terms of liability and billing, the 3 objectives there were green. And on page 53, in terms of collection and monitoring, 4 of those 6 were green, 1 is yellow and 1 is amber. The item that is amber is to do with the reconciliation of bank reconciliations with the financial ledger, and you'll notice that that's also been highlighted by the external audit report that's later on in the agenda. The system itself is adequate for purpose. This has gone a little bit behind time and is not as up to date as you would normally like it to be, and that's the reason that this is amber. But I felt that given that everything else was so well controlled here, that it wasn't sufficient to detract from a comprehensive assurance for the overall piece of work on council tax. We only had two small recommendations that were really grade 4, which is about improvements rather than a control weakness that had been identified, and there were a number of good practice items that were identified here. The next piece that I'm reporting here is the auditing of the payroll and accounts payable, where we do continuous auditing. We've now completed the work for the period from April through to June 2021, and we've got comprehensive assurance for those 3 months for both the creditors and the payroll. There's one outstanding item on the creditors where we have one item where someone has authorised both the invoice and the payment of the invoice, where we're still investigating that. I think we're almost at the end of that, and I'm reasonably confident that we'll be able to report that to you in the September meeting. And the final piece of work that we're reporting here is the IGB. This has been to the Igb Audit Committee, so obviously some of you will have already seen this, but we felt just because there were a number of council systems involved here that you should see it. It was a piece of consultancy work that was undertaken to help the Health and Social Care Partnership looking at how charging was being managed across the piece. It's quite a complex system, and it crosses over a number of issues had been identified, and some parts of the system had been documented, but audit was asked to get involved to help to map the whole system and make sure that all parts of the system were properly identified and any issues were surfaced so that they could be dealt with. There is a charging group within the Health and Social Care Partnership, IGB, that is looking at this and taking forward the issues that they had previously identified and that were further identified by the audit. And so we produced the mapping document for all of the systems, and we had observations and recommendations around the systems that we documented, including some gaps that had been identified. And also there were a few other observations and recommendations where it was just such a big piece to get to the bottom of everything. But we did note everything where there were still some queries, and these are being taken forward by the charging group within the organisation. So all of these things will eventually be explored to make sure as best as possible. I think the one thing just that I wanted to draw attention to here, the same issue as we had with iPay at the bottom of page 57, the third bullet point from the bottom there is around some processes having been stopped, and it was not clear sometimes why that had happened. And I think again, it's just around when there are changes or people moving on to make sure that someone has taken up the responsibility for areas to make sure that they continue to operate properly. And then we've got the section on the implementation of the audit recommendations. I just want to comment briefly on the bottom of page 59. These older recommendations that I know you've all seen an awful lot of times, we're almost at the point where disappearing from the list. A couple of them are related to the financial regulations, which are coming up to the council in September, and the other two both have 31st August dates on them, so they might not have disappeared by the September meeting, but I'm hoping they'll be gone by the one after that. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, bids for questions. Councillor Devine.
Page 43.
Councillor Bell.
Also page 43, thanks.
Anyone else with bids for questions? No, right, in that case, let's go to page 43 and Councillor Devine.
Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned that you're wanting to put participatory budgeting into 22-23, although I understand apply. I mean, we really do have to get this right this time. We've had a few tries at it and it's not gone hugely well. My ask of you, Cathy, would be that it is brought in early in 22-23 so that any learning from this can be taken forward, getting close to the point where we really do have to do the 1% mainstreaming, and that's going to take a bit of thinking and a bit of time. So if that could be early in 22-23, do you think that would be possible?
What I'll do is I'll speak to the people who are involved in implementing, bring the audit in as soon as is sensible to do that, to make sure that we're getting the best impact from that. I did have a quick look at what was, well, a high level look, I suppose is what I should really say, rather than a quick look at what was being proposed in the report that came to council recently, and it did seem to me that what was being proposed seemed sensible, but obviously, as you say, we now have to actually implement that, and so that's something that I'll liaise with the service, and we can maybe do a little bit of work with them as they move along, so that when we do the audit, it's quick rather than having to start from scratch at that point.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Bell, you were also on page 43.
Yes, thank you, convener, and it ties in really nicely with Councillor Devine's point. I was wondering what the scope of the PB audit might be, and I think it might benefit from a look at the original process, if you like, so that we can see how that evolved. And like Councillor Devine, I'm keen to see in that if there's anything that could be included in a narrative to give us an idea of how prepared we are in terms of meeting the Scottish Government targets for full implementation. If that's possible, please, Cathy, thank you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll make sure that that's into the scope.
Councillor Duff, your hand came up a late.
Yeah, thanks, convener. It's really just in response to my colleague's comments. I mean, I think the rationale for pushing it out into next year was that you surely want to audit something that's a stable system, and you know, we haven't yet quite. I would have thought it's up to the operational departments to develop the new system or the improved system before we start auditing it, because it clearly there were issues last time it was run. So I think we've got to get a stable system first before we start auditing it. That would be my view, and I think that's why it was pushed out into the following year.
Councillor Bell, you obviously want to come back on that.
Yeah, if you don't mind. Yeah, I don't have an issue with that, and I completely get the rationale behind that. But I was just wanting to make sure that the scope fit our requirements. I'm sure it will, but in terms of taking in the original process as well as the one that is currently being implemented, I would like to see a kind of linear reflection on that, if that's possible.
Right, anything else on item 5? Let's go back to the recommendations are to note the update on progress, agree to remove participatory budgeting from the set plan for 21-22 audit, note management's progress in implementing internal audit and counter-fraud recommendations, note the action proposed by the AJB in response to the IJB review of charging consultancy audit, and have a summary on that, provide feedback on the summary included at section 4 below, decide this should be included in future reports, and note the contract for IT support with assets has been extended for the 4th and final year of the current contract, and a review to consider future IT audit support needs and options for delivery is underway. Do we agree those recommendations? Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we move on to item 6, please? And it's Margot Williamson.
Thanks, convener. Good afternoon, elected members. This report is the annual governance statement assurances. It's an annual report that committee will recognise from previous years. It is in respect of the organisations that are included in the council's group accounts. Under section 4, you'll see a summary of the current position with assurances in respect of the organisations that are in the group accounts. Members are asked to review the information in the report, noting the timing for full assurance from the different organisations. Members are asked to delegate authority to the Director of Strategic Policy, Mrs Vivian Smith, to update the Council's annual governance statement once full, signed, and the signed off assurance is given by each of the organisations. And members are also asked to review the proposed wording of the letters to Angus Alive, the Health and Social Care Partnership IJB, and authorise the convener of Scrutiny and Audit to sign the letters. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Bids? No bids for questions? Do we agree the recommendations? Is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, can we now move on to item 7, which is Mr. Lorimer, page 66.
Want me to speak to that one, convener?
Well, I thought you would be leading on it and possibly handing it over.
Yeah, happy to do that, and good afternoon to members of the committee. Yeah, this report's a bit of a 2-for-1 deal today. We always bring the overview reports to the committee. This year, because the financial overview report, which covers financial year 19-20, so a little bit of time passed now, because that report was delayed in publication due to the pandemic, and we've brought both reports forward at the same time. It does make it quite a chunky and lengthy set of reports and appendices, but there's a huge amount of useful information within both reports in terms of the financial position of local government, and the second part, Appendix B, on some of the reflections on the impact of the pandemic as seen so far. So a lot there for the committee to consider. I think there's, within the covering report, we've picked out some of the key highlights, etc., from both reports. There's nothing specific in either report for Angus alone. I think most of the content of the report is really for councils generally to reflect upon as part of the consideration of the report. So that's probably all I'd want to say by way of intro, convener. I'm happy to try and answer any questions, but it isn't ultimately my reports. They're Accounts Commission reports for Scrutiny and Audit's consideration and comment. Thank you.
Are there any bids for questions on item 7? Right, there are no bids for questions. My comment, Mr. Lorimer, is a very comprehensive report. Too comprehensive. I think a lot of this could have been submitted as an executive summary, and for those that were interested, they could have linked then to the report. It reminds me very much of the SIPFA volumes that used to pass across my desk regularly, but it was only my desk as convener of finance. It wasn't the whole council. So perhaps some consideration could be put to the amount of, not paper, but digital time that is required for councillors to work their way through, quite honestly, a lot of information which is not particularly relevant to councillors, which may be relevant to a number of officers. And for an executive summary of how it affects Angus to be brought forward, because quite honestly, getting on for 100 pages of somebody else's problems is not really what I'm looking for. Councillor Devine.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment really, because Angus had so many good examples of work that went on, and yet there are none mentioned here from Angus. I don't think, Mr. Lorimer, you will know how they're chosen, but it just seems such a shame because we did really well. So many partnerships were set up and worked incredibly well. So it's just a passing comment, really.
Councillor Miles. Are you with us, Councillor Miles?
That's better. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
No, it was just a small point, well, quite a big point really, on page 88, the percentage movement in debt at council level, with most councils increasing their debt by 4% or more. Angus is one that's bucked that trend and reduced their debt, and it's very, very welcome to see, especially in these difficult circumstances, and full credit to Mr. Lorimer and all those involved. Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Thanks, convener. Just picking up on Councillor Miles' point, I'm not overly concerned about the debt when it's cheap to borrow, but I wonder, to pick up on your point, convener, that it might be possible for reports like this to perhaps come out to all councillors out with the committee structure, so that those geeks like me could still have it. Would that work?
Want to comment on that, Councillor Lorimer, Mr. Lorimer?
Yeah, thank you, convener. That's certainly possible. We could issue the reports as soon as they are made available. They're usually made available on the Audit Scotland or Accounts Commission website, so we could do that. The consideration of these reports from either Audit Scotland or the Accounts Commission is within the remit of the committee. So I guess it's maybe a question of how much the committee wishes to pay attention to these reports, but the consideration of these reports is part of the remit of the committee. I think it's a useful idea to give members sight of them before they come to committee, so you have longer to absorb them. Should you wish to go into the detail, they are largely there for information and reflection. I wouldn't suggest that they're a cover to cover read for every single councillor unless they felt that was appropriate. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Miles, is that an old hand? Right, thank you, Councillor Duff.
No, I just wanted to say, convener, I do find that the report's useful. I think it's useful to compare and contrast Angus with other councils, and that is one of the reports I always keep and stick in a desk or whatever on a filing cabinet, because you can pull it out and have a look at it, and I think it is a useful thing. It's maybe not for everyone, but I think it is well worth us seeing. Yes,
I would agree that with your remit at the moment as the shadow convener of finance, it would be extremely useful, because I used to have the same reports or similar reports when I was convener of finance. But I do feel for the majority of councillors, the executive summary and the link to the report would be adequate. So perhaps we could look at shortening what we get in front of us in a committee with the link to the report for those that want to dig deeper into it. Right, we're asked to review the content, and we again review the content and note that reports are about local government in Scotland as a whole, rather than Angus Council specifically. Recommendations 1 through 3. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you.
Agreed.
Let's move on to item 8, the unaudited annual accounts on page 151. Again, Mr. Lorimer, please.
Thank you, convener. Yes, this is the report. Again, we would bring this, an equivalent of this report each year. This is the report that covers the unaudited accounts for the financial year 2021 for the committee's consideration. Unlike the last report, in this report, we've actually only included a link for those members that want to go into the detail of the accounts. They were submitted on time. We're now going through the audit process on those accounts with our external auditor, and we'll bring back the audited accounts in a month or two's time to both Scrutiny and Audit for authorisation to sign those accounts, and then to council thereafter. So these are the draft accounts, the unaudited accounts for the committee's consideration today.
Questions? Any bids? No bids for questions. We're asked to note the Angus Council 2021 audited annual accounts available at now link, and provide any commentary. Councillor Duff.
Yeah, convener, I had a couple of questions. I think the first one is on page 152 and under 5.1, the financial implications. Yeah. I think it's just a typo.
Can we have the second page? Sorry to interrupt you.
sorry, the second page is 1154.
Okay, and Councillor Whiteside, you have?
I was just going to point out the typo. I also noticed that on page 152, but Councillor
Okay.
Duff's picked that up. Thanks.
Right, let's go to page 152, Councillor Duff.
Right, it's on the financial implications, and it relates to the general fund reserve, the adjustment of I think £115,000, and it's jumped from 45 million to 48. So I think it's just a typo. I think.
Middle bottom of page 5, paragraph 5.1, Mr. Lorimer.
Convener, yeah, that is indeed a typo. That should be 45 instead of 48,602, I think.
Yeah. That's kind of what I
Okay, thank you.
The other one related to page 154 and the bottom of the sort of left-hand column, and I have to confess I got slightly confused with that. My reading of that is we have spent more money than we planned to, and that's that 2.278. Is that a correct reading of the situation?
That is the deficit on a proper accounting practice basis, Councillor Duff, which is different from the surplus or deficit that we've had over in terms of its impact on our reserves.
Now, what confused me somewhat further was the other operating expenditure, that line, the point 594, that appeared to be a positive number, and the financing and investment income, that appears to be an additional cost. But why is it described as an investment income? Because that seems to be an additional to council.
Thanks. So just give me a second to get the detail up. The plan actually for this report had been to let Mr. Mill lead on the detail. He has unfortunately not been able to get connected back in this afternoon, so I've had to kind of step back into it at reasonably short notice. I don't know if he's actually on the call.
I am here, but I've no access to any papers. I'm on bad.
Did you get that question, Stephen?
Yes, I can agree with Councillor Duff that some of the descriptions below the 288,144 million are actually slightly confusing, because we're talking about financing investment income, and it's actually a cost, and similarly with the line above, it's actually income. So that 594,000 that you're seeing is actually the surplus on sale of fixed assets. So it's not it isn't operating expenditure, it's actually an income that's been generated. Similarly with the financing and investment income, that is a cost, again, with the biggest element of that being 17 million of interest payable. So what I'll be asking the staff to look at is whether we can put wording in there, so instead of just income, we could have stroke cost and put brackets around as appropriate to show that one is a cost or one is an income. The only thing I would say would have to check is that some of the wording is determined by the code of practice, so we might be limited on the changes. But I certainly agree that the wording there is confusing, because then the income is actually a cost, and vice versa for the line above.
Yes, enough.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed. Yeah, it confused me to start with until I sort of added the numbers and subtracted the numbers in various ways till I could see what the sense was. But yeah, some sort of text to make it clear would certainly have helped me there, because I found that initially a bit confusing.
I must admit, as a long-term old accountant, I'm quite used to seeing positive figures meaning negatives and negative figures meaning positives, and it didn't really throw me at all. But that's just because I've got accountancy training. I think for the layman it would be quite confusing. Right, where am I? Yes, page 151. We're asked to note. No, that's not what we're asked to do, I think. We're on item 8. Yes, we are. That's it. Yes, of course, we were at that and then we went off on a tangent. Yes, we are asked to note the Angus Council 2021 unaudited annual accounts and provide any commentary. Do we agree to note?
Agreed.
Great, fine, thank you. Can we now proceed to item 9, which is the interim management report, and it's on page 15, oh, beg your pardon, 159, and it's Mr. Lorimer again.
Thank you again, convener. I'm hoping Rachel Brown from Audit Scotland is on the call. I'm not sure if she's in the participant list.
I am, Ian. Thank you.
Good. I'll probably let Rachel speak to this report, convener, because it is one of her reports, if that's okay.
Rachel?
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Ian. Yes, this is our management report, which summarises our interim audit work, and it should come to you as part of your consideration of the unaudited annual accounts. It summarises the testing we've done on internal controls on the main systems that support the production of the annual accounts, and any control weaknesses that we find, we have to consider the implications for our audit approach for auditing our annual accounts, which we are doing just now. As you can see from the report, we have identified 2 control weaknesses which we've reported to you, and you'll see the agreed management responses in there. So just to confirm that we are content with the responses we're getting from management, and I am content that we will be getting the year-end Northgate reconciliation and be auditing it sometime in the next couple of weeks. You'll see that the reconciliations are now up to date for our audit. The first point in the exhibit is a fraud risk for the council that we're reporting to you, rather than a risk of material misstatement flowing through to the annual accounts. So in terms of our annual accounts audit approach, I am quite content that we get the assurance that we need from your financial systems. And there's one other aspect in our interim work, which is around wider code. You'll have heard me speak about the wider scope of public sector audit, which covers governance and performance and value for money. And we have reviewed as plan the council's arrangements for governance and controls over the COVID support grants that the council's administered on behalf of the government. And as you can see at paragraph 11 of the report, we've reviewed the controls in place over the 2 largest grants, and we are content that appropriate governance has been in place for these support grants. The council was under pressure to pay out a lot of money very quickly, so we're very pleased that there's been guidance issued and controls in place over that money, and that's £35 million that the council's administered there. So that's a finding in terms of our wider code, and the other wider code work that we'll be doing will be reported to you in our annual audit report, which will come to a later Scrutiny and Audit Committee meeting. And just the last point in the management report is to flag that your best value assurance report work will be starting just after this year's annual audit concludes, and we've had some early discussion around timeline with the council. And when we have that firmed up, we'll discuss that with it in due course. So I will take any questions on the report, but just to say we have the assurance we need over your financial systems that support the accounts, and we are currently auditing your annual accounts as we speak, and we'll summarise that in the annual audit report, which will come to you in due course.
And bids for questions? Nobody any questions? Go back to the top. We're asked to review the 2021 management report, provide any commentary. No commentary. Do we agree to note the report?
Agreed.
That agreed. Thank you.
Agreed.
We'll move on to item 10, which is the corporate risk and risk management report. Starts on page 167, and it's Mrs. Williamson.
Thanks, convener. If any time was a time to be good at risk management, it was the past 17 months. And I have to say I'm really proud of the work that the whole of the council has done in order to manage risk, and our wider partners actually. I mean, this report is really to update Scrutiny and Audit on the work that we've been doing, not just on evaluating the current risk register, but embedding the risk management framework throughout the whole organisation. It asks members to scrutinise the corporate risk register, the dashboard, which is Appendix 1, or the fuller report, which is Appendix 2, and offer any questions that they have around that. And really just to finish, to advise members that as a corporate leadership team, we look at this risk register regularly, and we manage the risk around the corporate services really quite effectively. And over the past number of months, the mitigations that we've used to control and expose the council to risk has left us in a really good place. So I'm happy to take any questions. Sorry, there is one other thing. The revised Igb risk management framework is also included at Appendix 3, but happy to take any questions from members on that.
Okay, bids for questions? No questions? Councillor Devine.
I've got one in 169, 175 and 195.
169, 175 and 195.
Yeah.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. Sorry, my wee hand wouldn't go up quickly enough. It's linked. It's 169 and 198 on the fuller appendix.
Okay. Councillor Braze.
We'll say one.
Anyone else? Okay. Can we go back to page 167, Councillor Braze?
Yes, well, thanks, convener. It's really, I suppose, what's not on there. I think it's entirely possible that we could see a quickening of the pace of change surrounding community empowerment, participatory budgeting, etc., from government. And I just wonder how well we could cope with that, and maybe is that something that we should be considering as a risk?
Through you, convener.
Yes, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, good point, Councillor Braze, and I can assure you that we've always got an eye on to what is coming up and what's likely in the future, and both through transforming the future and also governance, we continue to look at that. So whether it's a risk in itself, I'm not so sure. This is a high-level corporate risk register, and we try to keep them in a manageable number.
Mm-hmm.
And sticking to the 12, although we've added on a 13th, we feel is quite manageable. But your point's well made, and we are considering a number of things. Obviously, the most current one being the review of the National Care Service.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for that. And yeah, well, it probably doesn't need to be in the top 12, but I just wanted to make sure it's on the radar, if you like. Thank you.
Councillor Devine, page 169.
Yeah, it was the EU exit one where the score is 12 and the target is 12. Is that most of this is out with the council's control?
Councillor Devine, I will start the response to that, but Mrs. Smith may want to come in as well, because it's Vivian that holds that risk. Yes, is the short answer, and because we've actually gone past the date and we've managed the work of the council around EU successfully. But Ms. Smith may have anything else to add. Vivian?
Through yourself, convener. Thanks, Councillor Devine, and I would support what Margot has just said, Councillor Devine. It is something that we continue to monitor as a council and keep an eye on, and I guess we wanted to make sure that we were seeing the overall risk situation changing for the country and for the council to then respond to that. There's still quite a bit of uncertainty around the what's caused by Brexit and what is caused by the pandemic, and the impact of both on our organisation and on our people. So we're keeping a close eye on that on a concurrent risk basis, also with our partners nationally and regionally. So we weren't minded to take the target down at this stage, but hoping to do that in the not too distant future.
Okay, I've got another question on Brexit later on, Ms Smith, but the other ones, convener, it's fine.
Right, okay. Councillor Bell, you were on page 169 as well.
Yes, and the fuller appendix in 198. I don't underestimate the amount of work that's gone into this, Margot, and I know how difficult it is to balance all of these competing demands and risks. I wanted to pick up on the climate change one, and I fully appreciate what Vivian's just said will relate to this in terms of how prepared are we for climate change, but I'll be honest, I have panic attacks every time I think of climate change, and I guess I'm just concerned that the assessment on this, that we're sitting at a 9 and our target's a 6, might be on the low side when there's potential for significant change around COP26, which is coming very soon. And I wondered if you had any insight around that at all, because we might have to pivot quite quickly on that. Thank you.
Through you, convener. I mean, again, really good point from Councillor Bell, and we're very much aware of COP26. In fact, it was on our corporate leadership agenda this morning, around the plethora of activity that's going on across the council, across all services, to ensure that we are meeting what's required around climate change. What I would say about the risk register is that's the score when you've taken into account all the mitigations we are putting into place. So we're not there yet. And it could be that stays at that rate for quite some time yet, because we have to keep working on mitigations to get to the level that we're required to be. But again, I can offer assurance that it's certainly one that's very high up our agenda, and we are looking at it on a regular basis.
Okay, Councillor Devine, page 175.
Yes, it was about, oh gosh, it's so small. It's about training here, Margot, and I was just wondering, there's no mention now of lean training. Has that kind of gone on the back burner now, or has it been superseded by something else? Because at one point we seemed to be doing really well on that, and there were quite a few staff members doing their different kind of belts, was it? Yellow belt and things like that. But it just seems to have disappeared. Could you give me some idea of what's going on there? Thank you.
Yeah, I sure can, through you, convener. This is the risk under transforming the future. We're doing it a number of different organisation development staff in all areas around how we transform services as they currently are. So lean has been done with some staff. Some staff are still using lean, and we're using the lean approaches to some of the service reviews. We're also using service design through the Service Design Academy, and we're supporting staff with project management so that they could also go from situation normal to something new in advance. So I guess what I would say in response, Councillor Devine, is we've probably broadened out the kind of approaches that we are engaging staff on, and using the right technique for the right service review, and using that as a way of developing staff, their understanding, and also their ability to transform the services that they're working with. So we've not lost anything as such. We've actually just broadened out to other forms of input and training and support.
Okay, thanks.
And then yes, Councillor Devine again for page 195.
Yes, it is again on Brexit here, Vivian. I just kind of think that we're talking about keeping things, they're being monitored, but is there not some quite clear evidence coming up now from like our fruit farmers, our beef farmers, our lamb farmers, in the difficulties that they're incurring. But in terms of the council, I would have thought that there was certainly difficulties with the lack of building materials, the increased cost of building materials, and how that impacts on our house building and indeed our renovations within the housing situation. Because anecdotally, we're hearing about all these things that are just not coming to us because there are no more drivers. And that's Brexit, that's not COVID, that's it. Just, would you like to comment on that, please?
Yes, through yourself, Convener, Councillor Devine, this is something that we're hearing more about. The anecdotal evidence is saying that some construction costs can be going up as much as 15%. That has impacts not just for us as a council, but for business locally as well, and seeing that economic progress being made. I do know that there are opportunities that are being brought forward under skills packages, etc., to help fill in some of the gaps in service areas. And I do know that there are high-level conversations happening at a national level around some of the gaps in the HGV driver opportunities that are available just now as well, as a result, potentially in some instances of people choosing to go back to their home country. So I guess we're in a transition period, and we need to kind of identify where the gaps are and try and fill those gaps. And that's where assessing those risks comes in. And I can assure you that the group that we do have as a council and extends into our partners, we are looking at these issues. COSLA are doing quite a lot of work at the national level, and we are tied in with the work that they're doing, supporting them with giving them our local up-to-date information and trying to support business where it's appropriate to do so, to have those broader conversations at the national level, whether that's about food and drink type scenarios or anything else.
Okay.
Okay,
right,
thank you.
Finally, Councillor Bell, page 198.
It's okay. I covered it off in the original question, Convener.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Right. Any further comments? No. We are asked to note the ongoing work taking risk management forward, scrutinise the corporate risk register dashboard and the risk contained therein, and note the revised IGB risk management framework. Do we agree these recommendations?
Great.
Thank you. Let's move on to number 11 on page 215.
Thank you.
This is the proposed detailed risk reporting to Scrutiny and Audit Committee. Cathy Wiley, please.
Yes, thank you. This report brings you a proposal for how we can bring information to you about the risks that are in the register, and it's in response to one of the actions that was included in the external review of compliance with SIAS, and also following on from some of the conversation that we had at the self-assessment session that the Scrutiny and Audit Committee had earlier this year. So what we're proposing here has been reviewed by CLT, and they were content with what we were proposing, and I have included in the appendix an options appraisal just to show you the thought process that I went through in trying to decide what we would do in terms of whether or not you should look at the corporate risk register or the service risk registers, what programming method we should use for which ones to bring to the committee, which risks we should bring to the committee, because there are so many, it would be a lot of information to bring all of them, and which meetings they should come to. So the proposals, which are on page 216, are that we bring the programme in the table there to these individual meetings, that we don't bring anything to the June meeting, because that's usually quite a heavy agenda with the accounts, and hopefully next year we will be back to the normal timetable for that. And we've focused on risks that are either high risks in terms of their scoring, or where they're new risks that we might not know as much about. And the idea is that the director who is responsible for these risks, either themselves or their nominated staff, will come to each of these scrutiny and audit committees and make a presentation to you, just so that you can have a better understanding of where the risk came from, why it's there, why it was scored the way it was, and just some of the mitigation in place, just to have a better understanding of how it impacts on the business of the council. So, what we're asking really is for you to approve the process, or make any change to that process if you want to, and to agree the timetable that's in section 6.
Okay, bids for questions. Anyone want a question? No questions? Right, let's look at the recommendations. Agree the proposed process for presenting detailed risk information to the committee, and agree the programme of risk to be presented through to March 2022. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Item 12 is the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership Annual Performance. And I understand Gail Smith is going to be taking this one. Is that correct?
Convener, it's on the back of the previous report. I understand that Mr. Lorimer was to be doing a presentation.
Sorry, I haven't picked that up. On the back of which previous report?
Item 11, Convener.
Right. Is it Mr. Lorimer?
Thanks, convener. Yes, it was the financial sustainability was I'm effectively the guinea pig, I think, for what we've just agreed in the previous report. So the idea was for me to do a little bit of a background on the financial sustainability risk. If the committee are happy that I do that, shall I just continue with that?
I think you should just continue with it.
Yeah, thank you. Karen says a presentation, that probably makes it sound grander than it's intended to be. Conscious of the scale of the agenda today. So, I mean, in some ways, it's maybe appropriate that we start our detailed look at some of these risks and and look at them more closely. We start with financial sustainability, because that risk impacts onto pretty much everything else that the council does. So it is very much a corporate and wide-ranging risk. Now, I should point out at the outset that when we're talking about financial sustainability challenge here, it really mainly relates to the council's general fund and general fund services, which is the bulk of service provision. But by contrast, because it's subject to different and separate funding arrangements, our housing revenue account is in a different and much better, much healthier financial position. So that's something just to bear in mind as we look at this risk. Financial sustainability is a risk which will be well known to all members of the committee, because it's, the financial challenges facing all councils are well known and been well documented over a number of years. This risk, and maybe again, it's no coincidence that it's the first risk on the register, is there because it's one of the most acute that faces the council, and it's one of those risks which, if it's not managed, could have serious consequences for the council and for the services that the council provide, which we know many local people and businesses rely on. So it's really a very important risk to manage and to mitigate. As has been pointed out within the narrative, it is quite a long narrative on this risk because there's a lot there. But over the last 9 years, the council's had to save more than £71 million from its budget. That's roughly 26%. This is a significant amount of money. Now, the reasons for that are documented in our Finance and Change Plan that was approved by Council in March. That gives a bit more background on that, so members will have seen all of that. But in simple terms, the cost increases that the Council's facing due to inflation, due to increasing demand for some services, those costs have been higher than increases in the Council's income through government grant, council tax, fees and charges. And that's left a gap that's had to be filled year after year by a combination of efficiency savings, service reductions and other measures. Now, our latest projections indicate a need to save a further 23 million over the next couple of years. So that financial sustainability challenge or risk, as we're talking about here, continues. It's actually becoming more difficult if you think about the cumulative effect. So we need to find, having already found £71 million over the last 9 years, we need to find, or we're projecting we need to find a further 23 million. And those have to be new savings. Those have to be new savings on top of those that we've already implemented. So that cumulative effect is really quite significant as a problem. Now, we do have, as the paper that we've looked at suggests, we do have a number of existing controls. Those include updating our medium-term financial plans regularly, identifying new savings options through our change programme, monitoring our existing budgets closely. So we do all of that, but those on their own are not enough. We need to go further. One of the challenges we have here is that the council, as councillors on the committee are well aware, relies on a Scottish Government grant to pay for 80% of our net costs. So our challenge and our risk around finances, the challenges the council faces on this risk, are therefore determined to a very large extent by funding decisions that are out with the council's direct control, and that makes it the challenge even more difficult. Now, we've scored the risk 4 for likelihood, because really after many years of making budget savings, the options for further savings on a large scale, they're becoming fewer in number. They're certainly becoming less palatable in nature, things that we would really rather not do. So we think there's a heightened risk of the council being unable to balance its budgets whilst still ensuring we have enough money to pay for the people, the equipment, the supplies, etc., that are needed to meet our wide range of statutory duties. And actually, you see a number of the reports on the agenda today, some of which we've still to come to, in really important areas around our statutory responsibilities. So 4 for likelihood is where we think we are. We've also for impact, because should that risk materialise, i.e. the council is unable to balance its budget and meet its other statutory obligations or responsibilities, the likelihood is we would be placed in some kind of special measures, and that would almost certainly mean services being restricted until the council's finances are brought back into balance. We've seen some examples of that happening with local councils in England. So that's 4 for impact, because we see that being severe. Now, we have within the risk register identified a large number of actions to mitigate that risk, so we can manage it as best we can. Those actions include, making best estimates and updating them on the scale of the challenge, new options for savings and cuts, as I've mentioned, and using also one-off resources to smooth the impact of those further budget reductions. Within the risk register, which the committee looked at earlier, there's also 2 new actions now in the action plan. One of those to prepare a long-term financial strategy, which is not something that we have in place at the moment. We think that will give us a bit more visibility about longer term. And we're also going to develop, or there's an action to develop a clear plan on the use of the COVID funding that's being provided to the council as further measures to manage the risk. So those are all the actions that we're taking to try and mitigate and manage this risk. So in summary, I would say ensuring the council remains financially sustainable remains an absolutely huge challenge, especially after so many years of funding restrictions and savings already made. But I think we are taking all the steps we reasonably can to mitigate and manage the risk. Those steps will inevitably, I think, mean further savings on a sizable scale. And, you know, some of those savings will affect services to the council that the council can provide to the public. But part of the reason we have our change programme is to drive out as many efficiencies as we can, so that the impact on services from our financial challenges is limited. And if I could finish on a positive, convener, we have been successful in managing this risk for a long time now. It's one where we simply can't afford to slip up. So I see it being a high priority for members and officers in the months and years ahead. I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we're kind of going back a little bit to a report that was looked at a few moments ago, but I hope that summary, it will be a familiar risk, I think, to the committee and to members, but I hope that quick run through puts a little bit more flesh on the bones of what was in the register. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Councillor Miles.
It's not a question, it's a comment. Do you want it now?
No, just a minute. Councillor Duff was yours a question.
I've kind of got a question and a comment, so maybe if I can ask my question and then make my comment. Yeah, I just wondered from Mr. Lorimer, he's talking about a long-term financial strategy. What sort of timescale are we thinking about for that? And I suppose the other question I had was, I mean, we know we've got the change plan, and you get the impression that, you know, the change plan is becoming more and more difficult to make savings, and that's obviously is a worry. And I guess the other comment I would make is just looking at my own ward and looking at some of the issues. You know, things like coastal erosion and flooding are very much all down to global warming, and that, you know, that is going to get worse. And you know, you just look at the amount of and that's not going to diminish. So that's another worry. Sort of, it's a worry from climate change, but it's also putting increasing pressure, I would think, on our infrastructure spend. So that's a bit of a worry.
Mr. Lorimer?
Yeah, in terms of the timescale for the long-term financial strategy, we're thinking probably 10 years on that. The intention is to bring our kind of first version of that to council in the November cycle for consideration. So we're thinking about 10 years. I think the further out you go, the more difficult it really becomes to predict and project ahead. So that's what we're thinking in relation to that. I agree with the point about the challenges around the change plan. Made the point about the cumulative effect of the savings we've already made and having to find new savings then on top of those. It does take us to places where the options are narrower and more difficult either to implement or to accept. But that is not to say, I think we've got a really good track record in Angus through our change programme and other initiatives that we've had over the years. The corporate team is very much still committed to delivering on our change programme and delivering those further savings options for members to consider. But it ain't easy. It really is each year becoming more and more challenging. The global effects in terms of climate change, yes, we're mindful of those in terms of the impact they'll have on particularly our capital investment needs down the line. So those are things that are very much on our radar. Thank you.
Councillor Miles?
Yeah, if I can get this unmute.
You're unmuted. You've muted yourself again.
Yeah,
that's
okay.
It.
I have a phone going in the background that I can't answer at this point. Apologies for that. First of all, thank you, Mr. Lorimer, for the very comprehensive explanation of our risk, and really brought to the fore the problems that face us in the coming future. I totally concur that financial sustainability is one of the biggest risks we ever face, and we work hard to try and make sure that risks are mitigated. And to echo one of my previous comments, we shouldn't downplay the amount we've managed to pay back in debt repayments, because debt repayments is one of the first demands on council budgets, and the fact we've managed to reduce that gives us far more scope to try and deal with future demands. So the fact we've made all these debt repayments and it's not a future drain on resources is a very positive news story, and it should be lauded far more than it seems to get. So well done indeed.
Anything else? We've already agreed the recommendations in this report, so can we proceed now to item 12? That I think is Gail Smith.
Convener, just to confirm, it's Gillian Galloway that's coming in on behalf.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thank you for the opportunity to come along and present the Angus Health and Social Care Partnership Interim Annual Performance Report. My name is Gillian Galloway. I'm Head of Community and Healthcare Services within the partnership, and I'm going to be presenting it on behalf of Gail. The report outlines the performance for 2021, and that's on starts on page 231 of your combined papers, and notes the progress in delivering on the national indicators and some local indicators. The overall performance suggests that the partnership is making good progress on the direction set out within the Health and Social Care Partnership strategic plan. However, it is worth a note of caution just around the 2021 data as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and note that there are some delays in finalising some of the data for the full annual report, which will be published in October 21. The impact of COVID-19 pandemic may not be fully known until a few years down the line in terms of the overall impact, for example, on falls, care at home and complex delays. And there's some of that information detailed in the report. The covering report details some of the key exceptions under each of the 4 priorities of the strategic commissioning plan, which we need to work towards progressing to deliver our national health and wellbeing outcomes. I'm happy to go through them if committee would like me to, but I hope what the report does do is allow the committee to identify the progress made within the partnership against the backdrop of a very difficult year as a result of the pandemic, and just note that it has delayed some of the planned improvements, and in some ways it's actually expedited some of the areas of work as well. But all the associated improvements are monitored through the Health and Social Care Partnership. To leave it at that without going through the detail of the report and take any questions if anybody has any specific questions.
All right, bids for questions. Councillor Miles.
Yes, page 234, 235.
234, 235. Councillor Devine.
228, 229 and 234.
Well, let's start off with Councillor Devine on page 228.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Gillian. It's a really good report, and I do think that it's showing just how well you have met the challenges. It's been a hugely difficult time for everybody, but I think for the IT, particularly difficult for the partnership. I've just got a few. If I can take 228 and 229 together, Convener, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. Not that they hang together particularly well, but they're just on the next page. It was under telecare, the last bullet point, you're talking about comp, and we had a briefing on that at some point, a good low-tech piece of equipment, which a lot of people, older people particularly, can use really easily. I noticed 7 families have decided to purchase a comp, but I was wondering if you're hopeful that the partnership might be able to get some funding for that to provide them to those who need them. And then on 229, supporting care needs at home, the stats there on 98% of people using alcohol and drug services treated within 3 weeks is fantastic. It's really very good. However, there are quite a lot of young people who have started drug taking during the lockdown, and I'm also hearing that they're not willing to engage with services, and I think this is very worrying. I'm sure it's worrying for you as it is for me and for our communities as well as the young people themselves. It must be very, very difficult if people are not presenting themselves to the services, but I was just wondering if there is any way at all that this might be approached. Thank you.
Councillor Devine for the questions. I'll take them in reverse order if that's okay. So in relation to the ADARs, that is a fantastic response for us in terms of those of the client group that are presenting to the service, and one that we would wish to maintain. There is a lot of work going on nationally, as you're aware, around the Drugs Commission, and within Angus we'll work very closely with our ADP and Community Planning Partnership as well as Public Health to look at if there is any specific actions that we need to take in relation to supporting some of the younger population, because we do notice that it is the younger population that they're not presenting to the service, but there is increasing intelligence around the use of substances within that younger population. So we will take that as an action, and we will be picking that up through our colleagues in the ADP and Public Health, and work with Community Planning Partnership to see if there is any specific targeted actions that we need to take to support that. And that goes hand in hand with mental health as well, because we know that there is that link between mental health and substance use as well. And as a result of the pandemic, that increase in need and support from a mental health perspective is obviously also on our radar. So we will be looking at them hand in hand, but looking to see if there is any targeted work that we need to do with that younger population with our partners.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
In relation to the comp, again, a really good test of change within the partnership. There's a number of other devices that are also available. So we have engaged with the company around comp to see if we could extend the test and indeed get access to additional equipment to support that test further. So it's really around working with families to see what works with them, because through the pandemic as well, there's been a lot of families who have opted to use artificial intelligence, such as Alexa, and other devices to support them in their homes. In relation to the funding, that's something that I would need to take offline, Councillor Devine, and look at what the art of the possible is. I know that I am joined by Vivian Davidson here, and I'll have to pay tribute to her and our team for pulling the report together. And I know that, Vivian, you've been involved in some of the work around comp. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add around that.
Thank you, Councillor Devine. Thank you, Jill. The comp is being delivered as part of a programme called Check Tech Out, where we are introducing various forms of technology to people who've never used technology before, and encouraging them to think about whether it's valuable and whether it's using themselves. It was never meant to be a long-term solution for us. It doesn't link with our community alarm services, and we're in the process of moving towards a digitalisation of community alarm from the current analog system we have. Comp is quite expensive, as you say. It appears to be a low-tech solution, but actually it's quite significant technology, and it is a fairly costly solution. I'm sure that we're keen to grow our Check Tech Out programme because it has been very successful, but I'm not convinced that we would be able to provide these devices to people as a permanent solution from us.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Miles, page 234.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, again, thank you, Gillian. That's been said, a very comprehensive and good report. The dashboards I find are very handy when you want a quick glance to see how things are doing. Although in this instance, I think it's a bit misleading. On 234, the number of personal care hours of people aged over 65, we've increased that, and it's still seen as a red mark. I would have thought that should have been a very positive step, because the more that are receiving personal care, it reduces the demand in emergency respite. So it's difficult to know when you see a red mark against it why that should be so, and especially when you look at the target on page 240, the target for 2022 has changed quite considerably to the target in 2020, which is on 234. The one I do have slight concerns with is on page 235, the bed days lost to complex delays. Is there any further on that? I mean, I know the difficulties we've had with COVID and why beds days are lost, but is there any further on information on that? There's a brief summary on that included, but just if you had anything further, Gillian, thank you.
Before you respond to that, Gillian, Councillor Devine, you had something on page 234 as well.
I did. I'm not used to seeing this kind of information in this format, this dashboard, but I was concerned about a number of people prescribed items for anxiety and depression. I know a lot of work has been done on this, and in 1819 it was 336. 2021 it was down to 312, but the target for 2022 is up to 336. Or am I reading this wrongly? Can you just clarify that for me, please?
Gillian?
Thank you, Councillor Miles and Councillor Devine for your further question. In relation to the personal care hours, I think Councillor Miles, you'll recall the discussion around this at the IGB, and that whilst prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we were looking at how we could potentially reduce personal care hours, hence the target. Obviously, following on from COVID-19 and the increase that we have seen, quite a significant increase, and actually the benefits that we're also seeing from that, we are looking to revisit that target in line with the learning from COVID and how we would now want to work and progress with providing personal care at home going forward. Sticking to page 24, if that's okay, Councillor Miles, and I'll just take Councillor Devine's question in relation to the target for the prescribed medication for depression and anxiety. The target is that, and that has been the target that's been set from the start of the strategic commissioning plan. So in actual fact, whilst statistically it looks as if we're kind of similar in terms of 336 and 312, we have exceeded that target for this year, and we have to make sure that we're continuing to challenge ourselves with the targets that's set. So there will be a piece of work that happens throughout the next year, just looking to revisit all of the targets for all of the indicators that are not the national indicators, so that we can continue to make sure that we are improving and making progress, but also giving ourselves a bit of a challenge in the right way that's safe for the population of Angus as well. 2.5, in relation to the bed days lost due to complex delays. As you know, Councillor Miles, we have had some significant challenges and backlog as a result of the COVID-19, in particular around AWI applications and guardianship, which did have an impact on our ability to transfer or move service users from our inpatient bed. That has improved a bit, although we are seeing an increase again in relation to our mental health delays at the moment, and there's a piece of work ongoing to review that. Once the courts opened, we did see an improvement in terms of dealing with that backlog. The other thing to note around that, and it does impact on the personal care hours for people at home. So what we are seeing is quite a significant shift in patients and the complexity of patients that are being admitted to hospital, and that often has a longer term impact on their rehabilitation, the need for additional personal care at home. So whilst pre-pandemic somebody may have only needed care at home twice a day, because of the change and the deconditioning and the acuity of what we are seeing and that's presenting to the health system at the moment, we are seeing that more people are needing more packages of care, so kind of 4 times a day, just to deal with that increased complexity. And a lot of that is down to the deconditioning of the population as a result of the pandemic. So working very hard with our colleagues in AHPs to support some of that rehabilitation of the population. And again, that's back to the falls target as well. So it will be a while, I think, before we see the full impact of the pandemic, but I hope that answers the questions.
Yes, thank you.
Keelan? Yeah, right. Anything else on that one? No, the recommendations are, no, that's not the one I want. Sorry about that. Yes. Note the published annual report, performance report for information. Note the current performance within the Angus SCP for 2020-21. Note that work to progress forward have not been achieved is captured within the existing improvement action plan. Do we agree these recommendations? Agreed. Thank you. Can we now go on to item 13 on page 248? What that thing? And this is Mr. Mark Armstrong, please.
Thank you, convener, and good afternoon, committee. I present this report to you as the chair of the Angus Corporate Parenting Board, and I'm pleased to bring it on behalf of all our partners that are involved on the Corporate Parenting Board. As the committee will see, there's two matters before you today in respect of our corporate parenting responsibilities. And it's very timely that these reports are coming before you today with the recent publication of the National Promise Plan and the welcome focus on the needs of children and young people who are care experienced and the needs of families who are on the edges of care and in need of support. The first report is a summary report of partnership work that has taken place across Angus since 2017. Work that brings agencies together to improve our focus and work to improve experiences and chances of children and young people. It remains a very challenging area of work with many resource pressures, but there are many opportunities across agencies for us to improve our understanding and responsibility towards our corporate parenting requirements. You will see from the summary report, we have been working on our engagement strategy to ensure our work is informed by the real voices and experiences of Angus's young people and bringing new developments such as the Inclusion Support Service, improvements in access to advocacy and consistency of care. The second report in the paper is a presentation to committee is our revised Angus Promise Plan, identifying our key promises to our young people, our interpretation of the National Promise Plan. This plan has been drafted in partnership and in consultation with some young people, and we've identified some key actions to work on together. It's also my intention on behalf of the Corporate Parenting Board to bring a specific report to our Children Learning Committee with a request that our elected members sign up to the promise and give individual and corporate commitments to our roles to champion our commitments are and support to young people and care experienced children and young people. I'm happy to take any questions and also welcome any scrutiny from the committee in relation to the two reports that you have in front of you.
It's for questions. No questions? Okay, the recommendations are to scrutinise and comment on the Angus Corporate Parenting Progress Report 2017-2020 and scrutinise and comment on the Angus Promise Plan 2001-2024, getting it right for care experienced children, young people and their families. Two items. Councillor Devine, you've come up with a hand.
I know I was having problems with it, sorry.
Okay.
It's just on page 273. I have a question, but I want to say, thanks to Mark and everybody else forward, because I sit on the Angus Integrated Children's Services Group. I've watched all of this taking place, and it's coming together really quite well now. I hope that you feel the same. There is just a small question on page 273, which is about that pilot scheme that took place in our growth with Angus Alive providing access to gyms and pools. Now, obviously, these were closed for a while, but there wasn't a great uptake in this at the time, if I remember. It says it in there anyway, but I do remember that. And I was just wondering if there has been any work done on understanding the barriers, because I feel that it's so important for the mental and physical health of both the children, young people and their families to go and do activities like this together. So if it hasn't happened already, I'm sure we will hear it at some point. Thank you.
Mr. Armstrong.
Thank you, Convener Thea, and thank you, Councillor Devine, for your question. And as you identify, there was a lot of preparatory work went into that pilot to, I guess, as best as we could, identify what potentially were some of the barriers that might prevent individuals or family groups to take up that offer. And what I'll do is I'll hand over to Kirsty Lee, who's with us today, who was involved in the conversations with Angus Alive, and just to get some detail as to if there's any more specifics we've got on the reasons why the uptake wasn't as significant as we would have wished.
Thanks, Mark. I'm happy to respond, Councillor Devine. So you're absolutely right. The pilot pre-COVID period, we did put in quite a lot of work. And just, I suppose, going back to the basics, but understanding what some of the needs of our looked after children are. The pilot focused on giving free access to families for children who are looked after at home. And the numbers, when you break that down to the Angus locality, are actually very, very, very small in themselves. The other cohort of young people that we were targeting in that, we were young people who had come through the care system. And again, the numbers, when you took it down to locality basis, were very small. So the numbers eligible to access the pilot were not huge in themselves. But you're right, the uptake wasn't as much as we would have anticipated. There are certainly barriers that we had identified with some families and some young people. In particular, young people who are in the sort of primary school age range and up to secondary don't really want to go to activities with their families. They want to go with their friends. Their friends may not be looked after and have the same kind of access. So there's certainly lots of things in there. We did put some solutions in place where we offered buddy passes. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. We have now picked up again with Angus Alive, looking to roll this out. We've secured a bit of funding that will support that, because I know the climate is very difficult, but to roll out that free access for those two particular groups. And we've picked those plans back up, and we'd hope to bring a report to the next meeting of Integrated Children's Services, because you're absolutely right, we recognise the importance of it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Kirsty. That's heartening to see some money available.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you. I didn't have a convener, it was a comment, and I didn't want this report to pass without the acknowledgement that it's such an important piece of work, and I really value the approach that has been taken to be as inclusive as possible. I think the impact that this approach will have and for us to deliver on the promise is a massive of massive importance to children and young people who have care experience, and I really wanted to just reflect that and how important it is, and to thank you very much for it. And if there's any opportunity for perhaps older young people who've been through the system to speak to us at a committee, if that's appropriate any time, I think it'd be really valuable for us to hear that direct experience. Just bearing in mind, obviously, I'm aware of constraints around that, but for us to have that conversation perhaps might be really helpful too. So thank you all very much for that.
Mr. Armstrong.
Yes, thank you, Convener, and thanks very much for your comments, Councillor Bell. And just to reassure yourself and the rest of the committee that approach of really trying to bring those care experienced voices right to the fore of our approach is at the heart of what we're doing. And we have been working, Kirsty and colleagues have been working very extensively with young people to gather those voices, and I guess to support them in providing innovative ways in which they can comfortably bring them to their corporate parents' attention, and we will be bringing some of that forward over the coming months.
Okay, anyone else? If not, I've read out what the recommendations are. Do we agree them? Agreed. Thank you. Can we move on to item 14, Angus Child Protection Committee Annual Report 2019 to 2020. I've got Margot Williamson as the lead on this, followed by Alison Todd.
Apologies, convener. I couldn't get my mic off mute. Yeah, it's Alison Todd who's going to be speaking on this report. She's our independent chair.
Right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is really my first annual report as chair, because I took up the post in early 2019, although I was with you a couple of years ago presenting the previous year's report. So this report is from April 29 to July 2020, because we've brought it in line with national reporting requirements. And it's really a review of the work that we've done both individually, in partnership, both in Angus and Tayside and actually across Scotland, to improve the lives of vulnerable children and young people. Whilst the COVID pandemic was probably a very small part of this report, I think it's the one that probably people have got the most questions for. So I'm going to focus on that for the next couple of minutes and then open it up for questions for the wider report. So in terms of the pandemic, we did see a reduction in referrals during the first lockdown, which have now returned to more usual levels. This reduction was anticipated, but because the whole way along we had concerns about children who were unseen, unheard, and also the increase in family stress with some of the impact of poverty and isolation during the pandemic. However, what I would like to say is that the response to COVID within all the protection agencies was very proactive, and there was a really proactive approach to planning and risk management during that time. We scrutinised and analysed data on a very regular basis, having additional meetings of all the committees. We increased the messages to the public so that people knew where to go for help and where to report concerns. We very quickly got into a recovery plan when we could see that the pandemic was going to last for the foreseeable future. And on top of evident in this report is that business as usual continued. So yesterday, a journalist had a good look at the papers for today's meeting and pulled out key headlines, and we were going to have a spot on the STV News. So I changed what I was going to tell you today to focus on the headlines that the journalist pulled out, because I thought that's probably what you would be interested in. So the journalist pulled out that there had been a significant increase in demand on frontline services, with a rise in referrals following follow-up action. So I would like to say that it's very evident that there has been an increase in the number of referrals, but I think it's important to focus that that means that that has resulted in help and support at a much earlier stage than we have perhaps seen before, and this is something that we would like to encourage, and certainly something that we promote with our public messages. However, we do hear from the staff that the children and their families, including higher levels about the future, higher levels of anxiety about the future, the loss of income and the effects of isolation. The second headline the journalist pulled out was that there had been a significant increase in domestic abuse cases, from 46% compared to 30% the year before. And likewise, this is obviously something that we are looking at, but we have been really working hard to raise awareness of the signs of gender-based violence across all our services, and that would include domestic abuse. We're much more aware of the effects on children and the importance of highlighting this issue and holding perpetrators to account for their behaviours. So I think that has led to a much more improved identification of this type of harm, and it's probably a positive sign that we're seeing more of that when we look at some of the concerns, although we do have a lot of work to do in this area. And the third headline that the journalist pulled out was the rise in parental alcohol misuse. Quite staggering, actually, 5% to 16%. And we are continuing to monitor that right across the multi-agency partnership. But what we do know is that poverty and definitely isolation are a significant factor in terms of the intake and increase in alcohol as it's used as a coping mechanism. So just briefly to say some of the business as usual things that we've continued with. We've continued to focus on our 4 strategic goals. The Safe and Together is a partnership where we support the non-abusing parent in cases of domestic violence. The My Views app, because we're absolutely committed to making sure we get the views of children and their families. So we have developed an app, and that's being used in this period. We have a participation guide to try and improve the way that we allow young people to participate. We had an SCR, which you will know about, but was actually published in August 2020, and we really have done excellent work in terms of sharing the key messages from that SCR so that we can improve and develop our services. We've developed a training pack, we've developed a video, and we've actually shared some of the learning nationally. You'll see that the early screening pathway continues to be a focus for us, and the PRAM, I forgot what the anagram means, my apologies for that, but we have reduced the time for us to review those pregnant women for risk from 4 weeks to 2 weeks. So I think that's really positive, and we have developed a new strategic plan. So I'm just going to finish with some of the challenges. And the challenges are that we have new child protection guidance, which needs to be implemented. You've already heard about the promise. There's no doubt there is likely to be a long-term and ongoing impact of COVID, staff disruption due to the isolation. We continue to work on the wicked issues, how we engage with families, how we build relationships, how we make sure we really hear them and work in partnership with them, and how we deliver learning and development in the current environment. So I'm going to pass over for questions.
Councillor Whiteside, you have your hand up.
Thanks, convener, very much, Alison. That was really interesting. Sorry?
Questions, page number.
Oh, sorry, Alec. Just page number 302.
302, Councillor Bell.
A general question, please, convener.
Any more specific questions? Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, it was just around the time lag. Obviously a hugely difficult year, loads of really good stuff in the report. I don't mean to be critical at all. It just seems quite a long time before coming to committee. I noticed it was approved by the ACPC back in April. Is there any particular reason for that?
I don't think there's any reason for that apart from perhaps when we could fit it into a committee or holidays, holiday time. And yeah, I think it has been published before now.
Okay, thanks. As I say, really good to see the report. Thanks.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, and thank you, Alison, for that report. And I think the journalist probably picked out all the questions that I jumped to straight away. I know from working with Angus Women's Aid that they do quite a bit of work in schools around consent that they're not funded for, but I just wonder if we really need to take stock and look at that in future as ages of children crossing boundaries within the school setting gets lower and lower, and how what happens at home perhaps feeds into the school environment and affects other people, as well as supporting those children at home as well, and how we embed that kind of learning into the curriculum, because I do think it's really important. And I mean, we're seeing that on social media now, you know, those really disturbing responses to agency around individuals and what happens to their bodies. So I wondered if you could give us anything on that, or if there's anyone else in the call that might be able to help there, because I really think it's something that we need to address. Thanks.
Okay, so as an independent chair, it's quite easy for me to say because I don't hold the budget. However, I think that you've hit on a really crucial area in terms of protecting children. I always believe that the best way to protect children is to empower them, so that they know their rights and they know what's crossing boundaries and what's not. So I think that, you know, not just in terms of domestic abuse, but also in terms of some of the exploitation that goes on online, this is an area that we should pay huge attention to, so that we in schools, you know, produce or assist children and young people to become really independent and quite assertive and know what, and grow up in a world where they actually know what the boundaries should be, because I think increasingly in the online world they're getting more blurred. So it would be excellent if that was a, you know, key part of the curriculum, probably bigger than it is at the moment because it's so important.
Kirsty Lee has her hands up. I take it she wants to contribute to this part of the debate.
I'd appreciate that, Councillor King, thank you. I think your point is very well made, Councillor Bell, and it's something that we're looking at in the Violence Against Women partnership and a subgroup that's looking at prevention and early help in this area. I think something to note though is that we are making through our young people's mental health and wellbeing programme, so community supports, a significant investment in CEDAR in Angus, and we're using that fund to bring that investment. So work has started with Women's Aid, who will deliver that programme, and essentially it's a group work programme for mothers together with their children aged from 5 upwards, focusing on children who've experienced domestic abuse, how they recover and how they go into healthy relationships. So in terms of those direct supports to help children you know, recover from their own experiences, but also to have improved relationships as they move forward in life for girls and for boys, then we think that's a fairly significant investment. So we'd look forward to bringing some reports in the future about the impact that investment's made and contributing to overall better mental wellbeing. Thank you for that.
Councillor Brays.
Thanks, convener, and thank you, Alison, for an excellent presentation there. This is really just a comment. I find the whole field of child protection quite heart-wrenching. And I think your presentation there has injected a whole lot of hope and maybe inspiration at the entire thing. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, if that's us, the recommendations are on page 302. Comment on the contents of the Angus Child Protection Committee ACPC Annual Report, April 2019 to July 2020. And 2, to consider the key trends and areas for development emerging from the report. Recommendations? Agreed. Thank you very much. Let's move on to item 15. And can I call on Catherine Lindsay to give the annual Chief Social Work Officer report, please?
Thank you very much, Convener, for the opportunity to introduce this most recent annual Chief Social Work Officer report today. I appreciate that you've had a very long afternoon already, so I'll keep my comments fairly short. So the report before you today covers all aspects of social work and social care services delivered by and on behalf of Angus Council, including those delivered in the Health and Social Care Partnership, whose annual performance report you've just scrutinised. You've also heard this afternoon about our collective child protection arrangements from Alison Todd, the independent chair, and of course the corporate parenting arrangements in which social work also plays a significant and active role. Because of that, you will see aspects of these earlier reports and presentations also reflected in my annual report, and I make no apology for the accidental emphasis in today's meeting of the role that social work and social care plays as part of that wider local system of support for people. Hopefully today's agenda has highlighted not only specific social work activity, but its wider connectivity and application across a number of council priorities now and in supporting our continued recovery from the COVID pandemic in the future. Of course, this report covers the last financial year, during which services have been delivered in the context of the COVID pandemic. This resulted in significant additional demands and unique constraints on the arrangements for service delivery across a wide range of services. Council staff, carers and local providers worked together to continue to promote positive outcomes for children, adults, families and communities throughout that period, in spite of personal challenges generated by the pandemic and the additional complexity of the professional practice environment, which continued to this day. We were absolutely impressed by the efforts of the third sector and the galvanisation of the wider community in the support of all of those agendas. And for that, I commend their efforts to you wholeheartedly. Members will have seen that the report details several aspects of service provision and performance, which I'm happy to take questions on today. But some of the figures of note include the significant increase in the number of child protection investigations that we've seen over the last year, including an increase in the number of child protection registrations where domestic abuse was a factor. Almost double the number of child protection orders were also taken in the last financial year compared to the year before. A reduction in the number of looked after children, however, to 263 at the point at which we count for the year. There was also a significant increase in the number of people being supported by the provision, and we've heard earlier some of the detail around that from Jill Galloway. And of course, in my report, we also reflect the continued demand for mental health officer intervention, which again, Jill spoke about in context of your discussion and questions around the issues around complex delayed discharge cases. These statistics and the others in the report reflect the work of just a handful of the services being delivered daily by our dedicated workforce across Angus. And again, I would commend them and their efforts to you all today. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Councillor Devine.
Page 361 and 375, Convener.
Anyone else? Councillor Duff.
I think 388, 389, Convener.
Anyone else? Okay, Councillor Devine, page 361.
Yeah, well, before I actually ask my question, Catherine, so much for this all-encompassing report. I mean, we've heard quite a lot of what you've said before in this afternoon's report. But it's worth reiterating, certainly. I think at one point I thought this was quite a bleak kind of report, and yet that's not the right word, because the challenges that have been overcome have been amazing, and I really think your staff deserve every thanks from us on this committee, but everybody who has, got value from them. Children, older people, disabled people, all these areas have had increased demand, and I suppose sometimes it would appear there was no end in sight for your staff, but you've done incredibly well, so thank you. My two questions. One question is on 361 about PRAM, which Alison referred to, because I think this is a wonderful project, in fact, picking up these young women so early on in their pregnancies. And I see that there are 60 referred to PRAM in 6 months, which is a huge number, because I know it's very, very intensive work. Did all these young women continue to engage right through to birth? And then after that, did they participate in one-to-one parenting skills? The first question.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Devine, and for the acknowledgement of the efforts of staff, which will be much appreciated. So PRAM is not a service delivery mechanism in and of itself. This is the multi-agency resource allocation process that we have put in place to span the boundary between universal provision through midwifery and health visiting and kind of more targeted service interventions. So this is the pathway that universal services would use to consider whether or not a social work assessment might be necessary in a case, and whether that kind of level of support and assessment is indicated. And largely what happens when individual women who are referred to PRAM are considered, usually the situation is that they don't require a social work level intervention and assessment of their child's well-being prior to birth, but what they do need is access to other resources through our own early years service. So it may be that women have other children and young people that they also care for within their family, and sometimes we can offer some parenting support in the wider context there. Sometimes it's very practical support and assistance that we can provide fairly straightforwardly, because the people around the table at PRAM have access to those resources and can make those things happen for women. And sometimes, of course, we also refer on to the Council's Glen Clover project, which, as you'll remember, is a pilot project that we are still operating at the moment, specifically for this cohort, women of all ages who may be pregnant, may have young children, or may be on the cusp of the justice system and needing additional support from services. And so we can wrap around a high degree of personalised support, both practical and emotional support in those cases through that route. So it's very much a partnership approach. In terms of whether or not women stay engaged with services, not all do. Some women are made aware of the support and offers are out there for them and choose not to accept those. And these are not mandatory services, they are there for support and assistance. But of course, the opportunity to re-engage would remain there at any point in the future, and health visitors who will continue to work alongside women into the early years of their child's life will be working with them, and will continue to take any referrals for additional support that emerge during that period.
Thank you.
Okay. And page 375, Councillor Devine.
Oh, it's me again. Yeah, this was, I think, Catherine, but I mean, there has been a stubborn problem of our rates of exclusion of looked after children, care experienced young people, particularly those at home. So I was delighted to see that Aberlour is being involved here. I think they're a great service. When did they actually start? And I mean, have we seen any improvement in the engagement of the young people? I mean, there's no quick fix to this, I realise that, but it would just be nice to get some kind of timescale on that.
So Aberlour were engaged by us and initiated their service delivery towards this time, really, maybe even slightly later, maybe October time last year, so right in the midst of the pandemic, which was a very challenging time, I think, to initiate a service anywhere. We have a collection of services, as you'll see from that selection of paragraphs there, in terms of trying to support them, which is largely through improved engagement, and support for young people to access education in the mainstream. Yes, this has been a stubborn issue in Angus and in other places, and we have been working together with our colleagues in Education and Lifelong Learning Directorate, who I also understand are including this in their improvement plans. We've seen some really helpful outcomes from reviews of the situation of looked after children within individual schools, and a greater awareness around the particular issues and support that they may need. So there are a combination of different things kind of working together at the same time to hopefully improve this picture as the years go by. And of course, you know, attainment is obviously measured in a very specific way that's sometimes harder for our children and young people to demonstrate, and we will continue to find other ways to evidence of outcomes. In terms of the Aberlour service itself, I don't have any specific data to hand on that, but I can certainly get some details of that to you after today's meeting.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Duff, page 3.
Yeah, thanks, convener, and thanks to Catherine Lindsay for the report. And I mean, my question was really focused on staff, because this must have been a very, very difficult time for social work staff. I mean, most people in work have found it difficult, but I think social work must be much more difficult, I would think. And it's about the resilience of staff, and perhaps I think I see there's a comment, I think, about age profile of staff. I mean, I'm conscious we agreed some additional social work staff in the budget. What is the picture looking like now in terms of staff numbers? Have we got, like many professions, a sort of sudden cliff face where lots of staff of a particular age are going to retire, and, you know, conscious that if it's been a very tough 18 months, then perhaps staff of a certain age will decide this is maybe the time to go. So, I mean, how is that looking? Because I think that's something it would be a concern to me, and I think it would be good to.
Yes, so the workforce obviously spans both qualified social work and the wider social care workforce, and certainly we have seen impact during the COVID pandemic timeframe in terms of staff well-being and their physical health as well as their mental health and well-being. There has been considerable support at a national level in terms of developing resources, as well as at a local level in terms of PAM Assist and NHS Tayside staff support services, all of which have been regularly communicated and recommunicated to staff. We've been very clear that there have been impacts staff have that don't promote great well-being. So, for example, staff delivering some of those core child protection and adult protection services and interventions were sitting at their kitchen table whilst also trying to homeschool their children for a period of time during the pandemic, at the same time as having to make phone calls and try and liaise about how to keep other people's children safe. And that is the reality of how people were asked to practice at the very outset of the COVID pandemic. Now, we were extremely fortunate to have excellent support from our corporate colleagues in terms of IT, and we were able to get staff online very quickly, and we had a much better infrastructure made available very, very imminently compared to a lot of other areas. We were also given priority access to buildings and spaces in order to help staff do work. And I think those sorts of proactive approaches were very helpful in keeping staff feeling that, you know, there was a recognition of the task that was being asked of them. There's a recognition of the exceptional circumstances within which they were working. But nevertheless, the duration that they have had to kind of continually operate at that level, and it will have taken its toll. I'm conscious that colleagues in health and social care, with the increased oversight responsibilities in relation to care homes, the frequent data reporting to Scottish Government that was well over and above the kind of ordinary expectation, the regime of cleaning, the changes to guidance, some of which were very weighty tomes and had to be distilled and made sense of and implemented very, very quickly, obviously for a very good reason. All of that has required a commitment that I think it would have been almost impossible to have imagined was feasible before the outset of COVID. All of that said, in terms of the general workforce profile, there's a bit of a separation. So in adult health and social care partnership, there is an issue around the kind of wider demographic of the workforce also being of an older age compared to the children, families and justice workforce. So we're kind of aware of that differential. And the Health and Social Care Partnership Management team have got well-developed workforce planning arrangements underway that some colleagues on the call will be very well cited on. In terms of children, families and justice, succession planning in that sense is not as critical an issue. However, there is a kind of a more pressing issue of turnover in children's services social work in particular. And there are lots of different reasons why we think that happens, not just here, but elsewhere. These are very, very highly pressurised environments for people to work in. In terms of the social care workforce, there have been some impacts in terms of the availability of other types of work as a result of differences in the demographic of workforce available at any given time. So we had a lot of people who were furloughed. Some of them were available to undertake care tasks and were happy to take on different roles. They're now back at work and less available to undertake social care tasks, and we are finding it harder to recruit people to some of those roles. And that's across both children's services and older people's services, including services for the whole population of need. So caring is a very rewarding career, but it is also comes at a cost, I think, for people emotionally and personally. And obviously the hours that people keep in terms of shift working, etc., are sometimes quite difficult to make attractive for colleagues who are interested in that kind of work. So I hope that gives you a bit more detail than is contained in the report. And I would be happy to liaise with colleagues in the Health and Social Care Partnership to get a bit more detail for you on their existing draft of their workforce plan, if that would be of interest, Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yes, that would be of interest. Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, anyone else got anything? In that case, can we go to the recommendations, which is one recommendation, scrutinise and comment on the contents of the annual Chief Social Work Officer report for 2020-21. Have we agreed to that recommendation? Thank you. Can we now proceed to item 16? Mrs. Buchanan, the quarterly complaints report.
Thank you, Chair. Members will see that the report is to highlight the complaints received in Q1 of 2020-2021 and to assure members that the work's ongoing to learn from these complaints. You'll see the recommendations in terms of the report, and in terms of section 5 of the report, we have various performance indicators. These include the under 5.7, as well as the indicators details of the latest position regarding the customer satisfaction survey. And you'll see from paragraph 5.9, there are examples of lessons learned from complaints. Paragraph 5.11 also has details of the new complaints monitoring group that's been set up. And you'll note, of course, that the complaints are now handled under a new SPSO framework, which came in at the start of June this year. Happy to take any questions, and I have the author, Elaine Whittet, also with us today in terms of detailed questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay. Bids for questions? No questions?
Convener, Councillor Braze has got his hand up.
Has he? I see it now. Braze.
Yes, thanks, Convener. My question's on page 396, and I have another one on 398.
Anyone else? Okay, Councillor Braze, page 396.
Yes, thanks. I just wondered if we have any comparisons available with other local authorities in Scotland as to level of complaints, and I also wondered if we have any financial information on the costs for us handling those complaints?
In terms of what we have in relation to other local authorities, I don't know if we have them to hand at the moment, Councillor Braze. I'll pass over to Elaine, but certainly they will be published and will be a requirement from June to publish those. So certainly we can look at doing a comparison. And in fact, there's a national group under the Knowledge Hub that meet in terms of complaints, and I'm sure either Mrs. Whitted or in fact Mr. McCaskill is on that group. So certainly in terms of that, they could find out if there's any information that would assist there. In terms of costs, we're looking at this generally across the council in a way to capture such, because I guess you're thinking it can be expensive in terms of time for us to deal with complaints. In terms of that, we are in fact trying to rationalise how we deal with complaints, and have allocated a new officer post, which will be part of an existing post. So it's a part post to focus on the more complex complaints, because the process can be complicated. And of course, we want to get it right in terms of making the relevant improvements, but also deal with vexatious complaints, which can sometimes be an issue for officers and in turn for the council. But I'll ask Mrs. Whitted to come in case she has anything to add to that.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, councillors. Yes, Councillor Braze, there is a Scottish Local Government Complaints Network, and annually all the figures are published for all complaints. So I might take a snapshot of that and produce something for you that gives you against our benchmarking group within that forum, so you can see how Angus compares to others.
That'd be useful, thanks.
Okay, page 3 now, Councillor Braze.
Yes, it was just a question on, well, who's going to be on the complaints monitoring group? Is this a purely officer group, or are there to be councillors on it, or even members of the public on it?
I'll pass over to Lena. I certainly understand, because complaints are dealt with at an operational level by officers, the plan was to share best practice amongst officers. But Elaine, do you want to come in terms of further detail?
Yes, Councillor Braze. The complaints monitoring group consists of officers, senior officers throughout the council. So each directorate will be represented on the group, and the first meeting is scheduled for early September. We will work together to identify trends in complaints, any learning that we can take from complaints, and just to try and identify where we can make some changes within the organisation as a result of the complaints coming in. We'll also look to publish what we're doing in terms of improvements, so that the public can see that we are learning from the complaints that are coming in and making improvements. But it is senior officers, it's an internal monitoring group.
Yeah, that's good, thanks.
Okay, anything further on the complaints? If not, let's go to page 395 and the recommendations. 3 recommendations. Firstly, to note the information on complaints outcomes and the actions taken to improve services. Secondly, to note the complaint statistics for the period 1st of April 2021 to 30th June 21. And thirdly, to note that whilst advice has been received from the SPSO that the category of care customer care survey is not mandatory, officers will look to provide a basis for this. Do we agree those recommendations? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm just looking at the time in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen, and we managed to get through that in under 3 hours. I was sure we were going to have to extend standing orders and extend the time of the meeting. I wasn't sure whether it'd be an hour or an hour and a half, but we've done very well. So thank you all for being quite short in your comments and making sure that we got the meeting finished within the 3-hour period that we were allowed.
Thanks,
See everybody again.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.